Hi, I'm Paul Stringfellow, host of the Tech Interviews podcast. Just to let you know, this version of the show is audio only because it was recorded before we did the video version of the Tech Interviews podcast that we recorded with Michael Cade last week. But just to let you know, we do plan to do more video versions of the show in the not too distant future. So if you want to make sure you catch them, why not subscribe to the channel? Because I'll also be having some demo videos that I'll be dropping on here for different technologies in the not too distant future. But for now, you're more than welcome, of course, to sit back, settle back here on YouTube and watch the audio version of the show, or at least listen to it. And for now, of course, as always, thanks for watching. Hi, I'm Paul Stringfellow and welcome to Tech Interviews. On this week's show, it's all about marketing. And you know what? It might be harder than you think. So settle back and enjoy the show. Hi and welcome to another episode of Tech Interviews. On this week's show, it's another in our series looking at what the future might hold for organisations as we start to come through the other side of the COVID-19 pandemic and the way it's changed a lot of the ways that we operate day to day as enterprises and a lot of the things that we've been used to doing and how they might need to change. And so this week's show has actually come about from somebody contacted me. I always mention that at the end of the show if you've got an idea for a show. So this week's guest actually does have an idea for a show. And it's a little bit of a departure from some of the things we normally talk about on Tech Interviews, because this week we're going to have much more of a focus on how you build a marketing campaign, how you sell and market what you do as an organization to your potential customer base, and looking at some new ways that technology is helping us to be way more effective than some of the traditional methods that we have done to do that. So to help me to do that, I'm joined by this week's guest, Vlad Edelman. Vlad, how are you doing? How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
No, real pleasure. Thanks for joining us on Tech Interviews this week. So, well, as I always do, before we jump into our topic, why don't you give us a little bit about who you are and a little bit on your background?
Sure. So as you said, my name is Vlad, as I used to say, as in Dracula, Edelman, and I'm the CEO and founder of Targetable, which is the world's first virtual ad agency. And I'll tell you a little more about that, I guess, further on down the road. But how I got to that position was really kind of a very winding, long and winding road, from beginning and essentially and being born in the Ukraine to immigrating to New York with my family of musician mom and dad and family, and being the black sheep who now is in business. It's actually quite novel to me. Started as a journalist, writing about technology in the Web 1.0 age, and wound up doing quite a bit in media and marketing over the course of my career, including running CBS.com, launching ESPN's mobility business. Essentially, I was their wireless employee number one and built out that business from ground up, including launching a phone. And by the way, launching a phone 6 months before the iPhone, which was quite a task. And then
Yeah,
moved over
timing's
to
everything, as they say.
Oh my gosh, yeah. We had to wonder why Steve Jobs was so against us launching a phone because he was on the board at that point. And so moved over to timing is everything, and understanding agendas goes right hand in hand. And then moved over to the dark side, as I called it, to the marketing and ad side, and kind of got tired of hearing, let's find a advertiser to pay for that cool idea. On the media side, decided just to go to the source, and wound up again doing a couple of interesting things, running a couple of agencies, including agency called Ansible, which I founded for Interpublic Group, and was CEO for a few years, and helped grow in the mobility space. Again, kind of one of the first big mobile agencies. Did something similar for WPP called Icon. And ultimately wound up over on the West Coast in San Diego, running a company called BuzzTime or product for it, as chief product officer, and eventually building one of the first restaurant ordering tablets in the industry, having been involved in retail now for 10 years. And throughout my career, what has really driven my passion and kind of really always engaged me was, finding that intersection between, consumer technology and the passion that will help that technology get the adoption that it needs to be able to be or become a part of everyday life. And whether that's on the media side, or whether that's on the big advertiser side, or whether that's on the retail technology side, which is where Targetable plays now, that's always driven me to kind of do the next thing and build the next business or company.
So I think, and it's a broad and fascinating background. We spoke a little before we started recording, and obviously there's a whole lot more you could have gone into that we don't have time for on this show. But I think it's taking it to quite an interesting place, and I'm sure there's people who perhaps listen to the introduction, and I mentioned we was going to talk about marketing and advertising, and they'd be thinking, well, I'm an enterprise IT professional. Why on earth would I be interested in that kind of stuff? And actually, for me, that the idea that for the modern IT professional inside of any enterprise is it's about enablement. You're always looking at how can I utilize technology to allow my company to do things better, and that's why I thought that this conversation might be a really interesting one, and I say a little bit of a departure from the kind of stuff we'd normally talk about. But we kind of before we delve into how technology is changing the way that this kind of places, the way that people are looking at marketing and advertising now. Yeah, well, what's maybe set some context for people. What's kind of what the experience you currently have. What are you seeing from organisations today as they look at how they might traditionally use technology for raising awareness around their organisation, whatever that
Mm.
organisation does.
So that's a really fascinating question because it kind of goes into the broader question of, marketing's a weird career. It's a weird word. It means so many different things. It's so unbelievably broad, yet also incredibly vague, right? And so, as opposed to like a brain surgeon or a bus driver or a host of other careers. I don't know why I decided that bus drivers were specialists, but let's take the doctor example. Everybody thinks they can do your job if you're in marketing, right? Because it's very rarely that I've run into somebody who's like, oh yeah, no, that looks extremely difficult, and there's no way that I would be able to do that, like they would with a neurosurgeon or somebody like that. And not that marketing
Yeah,
is neurosurgery.
do people often say to you, marketing? Well, that's not brain surgery, is it?
Exactly. Yeah. And in fact, for the most part, and a lot of our customers have spent years doing it themselves under the false assumption that, it's pretty easy. You just kind of pick it up and you talk about your brand and you talk about your service, especially in retail, where you've got a lot of self starting entrepreneurs who have built really successful businesses. They think that they can essentially do anything. But the problem is that marketing hasn't gotten easier. It's only gotten much, much harder from multiple perspectives. From the perspective of the consumer and the fragmentation of the attention span and bandwidth and everything from how inundated they've gotten. The change has been absolutely exponential, and it's also been multidimensional, right? So you used to only have kind of broadcast TV and newspapers and radio, and now you've got everything, right? And it's coming at you from every different kind of appliance and utility you can possibly imagine. And so what's happened is, as at the same time as it's widened, and at the same time as it's become more and more complicated, the amount of people involved in it, and the amount of people who think they can do it, and the access to the tools and the platforms that allow you to essentially kind of self start your marketing has also geometrically increased. And so what's happened is a mind boggling amount of absolutely horrible marketing is out there, but the marketing that is successful, the marketing that is becoming more and more the standard, is the marketing that is self contextually aware. Right, it's the marketing, and I'm not talking about the huge brand building of Apple and the big Nike and the big lifestyle brands. We're talking tens and hundreds of millions of dollars on big commercials. I'm really talking about the transactional marketing, the machinery of marketing that runs every single day that sells you everything from tacos to shoes to gloves to lettuce. That's the marketing that I'm focused on, and that fascinates me. And also that's the marketing that most people really engage with every day, right? Because you may not engage with big brand marketing, but you engage with marketing every single day, whether you're deciding where to eat, whether you're deciding, which gas to put in your car, whether you're deciding, what kind of pants you're going to buy, right? That's the marketing that drives transactions. And that's the marketing that is not only incredibly powerful if you nail it, it's also very difficult to do well consistently with the proper frequency, and with the proper targeting. And the real answer there is, it's about the data, which is obviously the calling card of many industries over the last couple of years. But with this kind of marketing, it's really about the data. because the only way that you can possibly know your own context, if you're the marketing, let's think of it kind of as its own as its own thing, is if you know what the data is that helps define your context. And what I mean by that is, a advertisement that is aimed at selling you a hamburger doesn't really care, who you are as a person. They don't care about your personal identity. They don't really care about your phone number or any of the other things that have always been the classic things to try to acquire. The only thing that really matters is, are you hungry and are you close? And that's a very different way of thinking about marketing, and how to actually do it well, and what parts matter. And it's a difficult leap to make, I think, for a lot of companies.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many interesting things. I've made a whole bunch of notes actually just while you were talking there. There's so many interesting things in what you said, and it's interesting, isn't it, that technology be more readily available. This idea people talk, don't they, about the consumerization of technology,
Hmm.
is that, and it was a really interesting thing that you said at the beginning, that actually everybody thinks that people can do marketing. It's, nobody thinks everybody can be a doctor, but everybody thinks, well, it's just selling stuff, isn't it? How hard can that be? It's just raising my
I just got to tell
awareness
people
of
about
what,
myself. Yeah, it's like I
yeah,
just buy a couple of ads and make sure they know that my food's great. Okay, well,
yeah.
you and everybody else.
Well, and again, I mean, you made an interesting definition as well between this idea of brand awareness and targeted, kind of more targeted selling, if you like. And I think that's an interesting difference, isn't it? If you're Apple, Coca-Cola, you're always doing this kind of thing about raising the brand. I mean, people appreciate what you do already and know where to find you, but I suppose you're just trying to keep kind of front of people's minds. But actually, for most of us, our marketing isn't about that. Our marketing is about, I have some things I'm really good at. I'd like
Exactly.
you to buy them. And I'm trying to identify kind of who that person is who has a buying requirement. And and you talked about kind of the use of data, and I think that's something we're really going to dig into, because you said something, and I won't steal the thunder of the phrase you used, but I thought it was a really good one. You talked about something around kind of the amount of data people have, and whether that's a good or a bad thing. But before we talk about that, just kind of wanted to clarify one thing. You talked about this kind of self contextually aware kind of idea. What do you mean by that?
So, and the phrase that I use or I just use to kind of define that marketing is really transactional, right? To me, it's really about the transaction, whatever that transaction is, whether it's an exchange of knowledge or whether it's a monetary exchange for a product. To me, the two big divides are, brand and transactional. And by the way, I mean, the dirty secret, and I ran two ad agencies, brand is uh, very questionable how much of the gazillions of dollars that are spent on brand every day, especially on extraordinarily well developed, mature brands like an Apple or somebody like that, how much of that money is actually worth the spending, is very, very open to debate. So, to answer your question though, what I mean about as far as contextually aware, it's talking about essentially what knowledge, and I use that term with quotation marks because it's going to get complicated in this conversation. But what knowledge does a marketer need? And I define marketer very loosely because the marketer could be a person, a media buyer, or a planner at an agency, but the marketer could also be something automated, some process, some software like us, like Targetable. And so when I talk about, what knowledge or data does a marketer need to be relevant to the context in which a consumer is engaging with that thing that's being marketed, let's call it. And so if you're trying to sell a hamburger, I was trying to probably unsuccessfully use the use the example of, if you're trying to sell a hamburger, there's a whole host of data that you have access to that doesn't matter, right? It's data that is meaningless to the transaction of selling a hamburger or the transaction of selling a car, right? And so what I care about when I sell a car is, how many other cars have you owned? What kinds of cars have you owned? Who else is in your family? Who's going to be driving this car? Are you scared? Over the experience. Have you had a bad experience before? Are you close enough for a test drive? And so all of that data is extremely relevant to the transaction. But a host of other data that you typically get and people get excited about, such as what's your phone number and How many mobile games do you play? And do you love to surf? You know, people will usually look at data like that and say, oh, look at that. That's so interesting. That's fascinating. Interesting isn't valuable. Interesting is just interesting. And figuring out what data makes a transaction contextually relevant for the customer that you're trying to reach, that's the ball game, because that's becoming harder and harder. And that's the problem and the challenge, which is the amount of data is increasing at such a volume, and it's such an exponential speed that a lot of human beings are actually really struggling to figure out how to actually interpret it, and what of that data matters and what doesn't, which is
So,
why.
well, I think you Well, I think you make again really good point there, and it was kind of the next thing I had in mind to ask you was that it sounds as though the amount of data that we're gathering and the systems that we're using traditionally are full of information that is interesting but not necessarily valuable. And I mean, is that the main problem that you see with kind of current approaches to this? The way you said something to me before we started recording around about CRM. But is that kind of the challenge that you're seeing, that actually organizations and maybe particularly now, over these kind of last few months and as people start to look forward, are the
Mm.
big challenges that people are coming across is that they don't, the data and the technology they have is actually not really that fit for purpose when it comes to finding somebody who wants to do a transaction with them?
That's part of it. What I will say is, I think that the problem, and I, use that again. I use that term loosely because problem can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I think, for the sake of this discussion, I think the problem is twofold. One is, it's hard to identify which data matters. It's hard to set up the process to answer that question. So first, it's hard to first, there's customers who don't acknowledge the fact that they don't know what data actually impacts. Let's start there, right? And then the second step is, okay, well, if you do acknowledge it, then how are we going to get to that data that actually matters? How do we test? How do we create a process that is rigorous enough where the data at the end will give you confidence that that is the data, and it's not just by way of the fact that it's too little or you didn't look at it long enough, that it's actually not the right data. It just looks like the right data. And then the biggest problem, I'll tell you, of what we've seen in the execution part of it, is when you do figure it out, when you do find the right message and the right ad and the right medium and the right customer to target, nobody, and I will say this with 100% confidence, nobody spends enough money and does it long enough. The biggest problem is always, especially with local transactional marketing, is frequency and spend. You've got you've got companies who have figured it out, even, and they'll get to an ad and they'll run it once, or they'll run it three or four times, a week. And the problem is, and that's a bad example, because the problem is that it's not about finding the one message and one time and then sitting down and being like, "Ooh, that was really hard, guys. That took us a long time. I'm glad we found the solution. Well, let's all go get a cup of coffee." That's not the reality today. The reality today is you have to do it over and over and over and over again, because the data that's relevant every day changes. It changes when it rains versus when it's not raining. It changes when there's a traffic issue in front of your store or something like that. It changes because consumers change, and because your message could be different and be relevant to different people on a given day. And that's the big difference between retail and physical world marketing, by the way, and purely digital marketing. The reason we started Targetable is because there was a huge opportunity in the fact that all these digital tools that are out there, even the Google, ad platform for Google AdSense and Maps and Facebook's ad platform manager, not only are they horribly complex and they still haven't advanced to a usable state in 15 years, but they don't allow the customer to actually learn how to do this better. And they don't take into account Eloqua, Blue Kai, all these guys. They don't take into account the physicality of real space, because weather doesn't matter to digital sellers. Traffic doesn't matter. Demographics, they matter, but not too much. Not in terms of their you know uh, uh, regional specifications. Is there a school around the corner? Is there a military base? Is there a church? Those are the things that give context.
Yeah, that's it's a fascinating differentiation as well, because I think it's very easy, and we see this in the technology world all the time. I think it's very easy that we look at an Amazon or we look at a Google, and we all decide that the
Exactly.
way that we should try and deliver technology or raise awareness for our business should be that model. But actually, that model is so very different for those organisations
Absolutely.
that it really doesn't have a grounding in reality for most of the businesses. That certainly, I think everybody will be listening to this show. That those kind of businesses that we operate in. And so
By the way, can I just
uh,
go ahead? Sorry.
yeah, yeah, go on.
I just want to make one quick point, which is one of my like absolute pet peeves is this incredibly lazy shortcut language that people use for and not you, by the way. I'm just saying, like, analysts and stuff like that who use Amazon as kind of the big bad wolf of the retail industry, and it's putting all these physical stores out of business. Blah blah blah. It's utter bullshit. I mean, the reality is, first of all, there's plenty of retail that's putting itself out of business. That's a different business running issue. But the reality is, there's plenty of business out there, right? I mean, people forget 87% of all of all transactional real I'm sorry, commerce it still takes place in the physical world, right? I mean, if you read an analyst report, or if you read articles about this, you would think that Amazon is already owning 80% of the entire commerce pie worldwide, but they don't. And the problem is, when you compare a physical business to an Amazon or a digital business, you miss everything, because what you miss is the not just the downsides of having physical space, but you miss the upsides. And so what you've seen, and I've seen this a lot, I'm sure you have too, which is retail businesses and physical world businesses chasing digital KPIs and chasing digital best practices in a blind way, where they don't really understand, hey, that's not the best model, because I have 45,000 physical stores out here and 100,000 people working for me. And by the way, as much as that could be a downside, it's also a huge advantage to my operating model, because I can do things that nobody else can who's purely digital.
And I suppose that leads on to kind of the reason I thought it would be an interesting conversation for us to have, and I think I've been proved right very much so far. So when I kind of looked at what you guys did as a business, what really struck me around that was the kind of the way that you're using data to not only be targeted, but it was something you talked about before, about the idea that people don't do this enough and for long enough. But one of the other things you kind of got to in there was that people can't react quickly enough to opportunity as well, and that's what kind of struck me about what your platform does. So so for those who are listening, who we've talked about Targetable, we've mentioned name a couple of times. So what are you guys doing in terms of as a platform, and how are you utilizing data and technology to try and fix some of the problems that you see day to day?
So I appreciate this wonderful opportunity to market myself, and my and my company, but I'll try to make it useful, at least. So, so our idea was very simple, which is, there was this first wave of virtualization that happened, and all of us use it pretty much, especially if you're listening to a podcast like this. You've used it, or you're using it, which is things like Uber, things like Shopify, things like Airbnb. Those are businesses that have essentially virtualized a service or a process that used to exist purely in the physical world before that, right? That was called taxi dispatch, which was what Uber is, and real estate rentals, and holiday rentals, which is Airbnb, et cetera, right? And so, what we realized is, as we were moving more and more into this world of data, and as the analysis of this data became more and more critical to the success of advertising, especially in retail, human beings were becoming less and less the right answer, right? Media companies, agencies, ad agencies that specialize in media buying and planning. The problem with them is that the minimum cost to doing really, let's just say even at least mediocre media buying and planning on a monthly basis is between $2,000 and $5,000 a month. And even that, if you think about what does that actually deliver to the ad agencies, that's maybe $55, 60, $75,000 a year. That doesn't get you even a junior media planner full time. But to a retail business that functions on margins that are profoundly different from digital businesses, and for businesses that have 10 locations, 25 locations, hundreds of locations, thousands of locations, they would need to spend that equivalent on an agency for each retail location because they're located in a different physical place. And so that means different audience, different consumer, different priorities, different times, and so on and so forth. And so the classic model of advertising simply doesn't pencil out. And so what we decided to do is just build a virtual ad agency that didn't have humans, and instead of humans was using computers and analytics to take in data and to analyze what should be advertised when, how, and to whom. And so what Targetable does is by using essentially the universal standard now of logging on through Facebook or Google, you give us permission to go out and assemble what we call a rich data profile within the first few minutes of meeting you. And so as soon as you log in with Facebook, we go out and the system, and this is actually quite novel because the speed with which we do this is only thanks to Amazon and a couple of services that they provide us. But we assemble every like and comment and mention and review and anything that's been ever said about you on the internet within minutes of meeting you. That means Facebook, that means Google My Business, that means Yelp, that means TripAdvisor, that means everything. And then the system goes out and says, okay, what is the physical address of this business that's signing up for Targetable? Oh, it's the corner of Main Street and Highland. Perfect. What do I need to know about that location to make that advertising more relevant? It goes out and sucks in average weather, traffic, demographics, geographic location, things like military bases, churches, and schools to see what's relevant. And then finally, and this part of it is getting stronger and more powerful because we're almost at 300 customers now, it goes out inside of itself and sees, okay, what other businesses that look kind of like this business are out there and what has worked for them. And so long story short, within minutes, but no more than hours of engaging with a business, we've built out a data profile that is deeper, that is more relevant and more useful to building highly, contextually aware advertising than that business has ever had. I can almost guarantee it. And then all the system is very, very lean back for the customer. The system then starts generating ads. They're pre-formatted for Facebook, for Instagram, soon for Google. And it just pitches you like an agency. It pitches you multiple campaigns every week and says, have you thought about, there's a lot of chatter about your fried chicken. It sounds like it's really popular. Would you like to build a campaign around that? You're right around the corner from a school. Should we do an after school ad to attract attention and do a 10% discount? Your competitors are doing 20% discounts in this zip code. Would you like to do something similar? And so on and so forth. And after a while, the system, on the first set of ads that the system builds for you, our goal is to create an ad that is as good as an agency can within 90 days. But by the end of it, or by steady state with a customer, the system is building ads that are so far beyond what an ad agency can do and with such frequency, because the system also runs them and manages them for you. And so when you like an ad, you click publish and we take care of the rest. It publishes to Facebook. The system monitors performance, analyzes it, sends you reports, and essentially does all the job of an agency. But it does it for $149 a month instead of $7,000.
Yeah, I mean, it's that, and one of the reasons that I was kind of keen to have this chat with you, because I think it's a great example of how we can use new and emerging technology. We all talk about data as this kind of, data is a new oil, all those kind of things. And one thing you'd said to me earlier on was this idea that, it's that difference between having lots of data that might be interesting versus data that is useful. Exactly. And I think this is where, we can start to use technology around us, machine learning algorithms. We can look at a wider data set than any human could ever look at more quickly than they could look at. and start to deliver real value real quickly. So Vlad, I think it's been a fascinating insight into not only the challenges that people see around kind of marketing and targeting their advertising and targeting their business generation workshops and routines in the modern world, but I think it's a great example of how utilizing data and technology can help us to do that better. So if people have been equally fascinated as I have by this, what's a good way they can find out more about what you guys do over at Targetable? Is there ways, for example, they can kind of get a demo or try some of this stuff out for free, or over a kind of a proof of concept idea?
Absolutely. So, we are in the final couple of weeks of a huge promotion we ran for to help out customers during the pandemic. So, I believe, and I'm gonna really be hated by my head of marketing right now, but I believe that it's running through the end of June. But it was a 2 months free, absolutely free, no strings attached. We're, by the way, also a month-to-month service, which very few SaaS businesses will do, because our concept is very simple, which is if it's not working for you, we don't want you to pay us. So, but in this case, we're also giving away 2 months free. So if you sign up, exactly as a paying customer. You do have to spend money, obviously, buying media, which is not ours, and we don't take any piece of, and we don't make any money off of that at all. In terms of buying the ads on Facebook or buying them on Instagram. But you get us for 2 months and at full service. And targetable.com is where you can see all of the latest promotions and kind of contact us. We're a demo heavy company. Once you see the product in action, and once you see it working, the stats, we close a lot of customers when they see us, because it's extraordinarily compelling. And I think that it's the future of how a lot of these kinds of services are going to work.
Well, Vlad, I shall make sure that a link goes into the show notes so people know where to find you. But for now, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show, and hopefully everyone again sometime in the future, and speak to you soon. Thanks, Vlad.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope everybody stays safe and healthy.
I hope you enjoyed that. For show notes, pop over to techstringy.com. We'll also find all our previous Tech Interviews episodes. And if you'd like to appear on the show or have got an idea for a show, then why not drop me an email at podcast@techstringy.com. And if you want to make sure you catch the next episode of Tech Interviews, then why not subscribe? You can subscribe in all good homes of podcasts, and of course you can subscribe on the new TechStringy TV YouTube channel. So until next time, thanks for listening.